Hi, everyone. Well, hi, Ebony. Good to see you. And thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Everyone, welcome, welcome, welcome. We have an incredible conversation geared up for today. I know that Ebony and I, have been just talking a little bit through some of this. And what we are doing here on Winning Trends today is really navigating difficult conversations and how our managers in corporations and organizations having the pay equity conversation. We know pay equity in so many different ways, but in a recent article that was released by the Harvard Business Review on November 28th, I immediately texted my friend Ebony and I was like, we really need to talk about this topic before 2023 starts. And so here we are. And so Ebony, welcome to the show. Welcome to our floor. And I can't wait to just chat with you. And before we hit it off to Ebony, I wanted to just share with you and remind you, I'm Yanyn San Luis. I go by Yanni. I'm the CEO and founder of The Win Woman, where we are a social impact firm that helps organizations win and cement their legacies by really fine-tuning their effectiveness of their CSR and ESG initiatives. And here with me today, I have my dear and very favorite, one of my favorite friends, Ebony Smith, who is, frankly, the leader. I feel like you are the expert and leader in all things in building out world-class employee experiences. And so, Ebony, love for you to introduce yourself at this time, and then we can get this conversation going.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ebony Smith. I'm the founder of Ebony Equation. I'm a leadership coach and trainer. I'm ICF accredited. I'm an MCC. There, quite frankly, are about 1,100 of us in the world of MCCs, right? And if you talk about MCCs of color, about 3%.
My goodness. So you are trailblazing, my friend. You are a trailblazer in this space and excited to dive into this topic. So I thank you for joining us. And so let's kind of dive right in. So what's happening, everyone, is right now there's a shift in pay transparency. And at the beginning of 2023, there's a number of states between California, Washington, New York, a number of states in the United States that are going to be, US workers are going to be covered under pay transparency laws and will join a long list of other organizations. I know the EU, and Ebony, and you have that stat, but the EU has passed some similar laws and are coming in. And here's the thing. What we are predicting is that pay transparency and the transparency trends are going to continue to grow and exist. And I think that what's happening is a lot of employers are maybe kicking and screaming or not really thinking about how the conversations are going to go at this time. But we want to just start thinking through what this culture will be, what's going to look like, and really empower managers to have candid conversations, but also how are we empowering employees and the employee experience to have their own agency to have these conversations with their managers. So I'd love to ask you, Ebony, in the incredible work that you do with building these world-class employee experiences and these culture, how do you see for managers to really start dictating this conversation? And, sometimes it might be even awkward to just, how do you face that? Like, it's transparent. You can see side by side what your colleagues make. What do you do in this regard? And how should they be prepared to tackle this?
I'm going to take you back to one of my own personal life experiences.
Okay.
This is Ebony that had just graduated with her master's. I'd never worked full-time before, but I just finished my master's degree. A friend in my master's program had gotten me an internship at his company, right? I interned there for about 1.5 years while I was getting my master's. And then I got offered a full-time job doing a very similar role that he was doing. We were in the same master's program. And so he said, feel free if you have any questions while you're negotiating to let me know. Happy to help you. What I figured out was I was offered a job getting paid much more than he was.
Oof. Okay.
And so it worked out in the sense where the hiring manager was shocked that I shared my salary. I don't work there. I don't have anything to lose. Right. I'm in the middle of a job search in general. didn't have anything to lose. And what it did for them was they had to up his salary.
Which is a great thing. It's a matter of just like building. I love the fact that you did that because it enables a lot of times we feel, oh no, we can't share financial information, or even, and just for everybody who's listening in here on LinkedIn today, just a matter of understanding that there is no law that prohibits you. In fact, employers and corporations cannot prevent you from discussing compensation here in the United States. And therefore, more conversations need to happen in this regard to just increase equity. Because if it's held in secret, then that's where you're losing, frankly, the opportunity to elevate that side. I'm sure he was grateful for you to share that piece to get that.
Gratitude not what he had for me. He was he was angry with his employer.
Oh, okay.
Because he got hired with a bachelor's degree. I was coming in with a master's.
Sure.
Right? And so he was not happy. It made me think a little bit more as I moved along in my career. And probably was another almost 8 years before I got a role on a team. I was transferring internally. And the gentleman who was more senior, he goes, by the way, we hired both of you at the same time. I'll tell you, and he said to me, I'll tell you what me and the other woman who got hired together did. We always made them keep us in parity, because you're always going to have a good year and somebody else may not have a great year. The way you stay in parity is to always share your bonus and your salary. So the guy I got hired with, I said, oh, I was given this advice by, let's call him Jim. Do you want to do that? And he goes, no, I don't want to make with you. I said, okay. Fast forward 3 years later. We're all working together as a team. He and I have been on the team for 3 years. And our boss goes, oh, we're having a meeting, but it's at this level and above. All of you who are at that level and above need to come. So I start gathering my stuff. He goes, are you at that level? I said, I have been for 3 years. Right. And he goes, what? I said, I asked you if you wanted to share. You told me you didn't. So I didn't. He goes, how often have you been getting promoted? I was like, every year. I said, you haven't been? He was like, no, I wasn't asking. I said, well, you have not because you asked not.
Right. Well, you have not because you asked not. You have to just right there.
Right? Because when asked, I'm going to need more money. That's amazing, but I'm going to need more money. Right. And so those are the things. And I think, one, I was getting promoted because I had the receipts.
Of course.
But two, I had a leader who understood my value in the marketplace. And if it was easy to replace me. And what would it cost him to go out, recruit, and train to get somebody at the level at which I was contributing to the team? And I was a top line revenue generator, so it was very easy to pull my numbers.
Right.
And so I think as we go into this new trend, Generation Z is going to love it. Gen X, which I'm a part of, will be like, we never talked about money.
Right.
And millennials will be like, do we want to talk about money? Right. And depending on where you are in the spectrum of population, race, gender, non-gender identifying, you may or may not want the information.
Right.
Right. Because it's either going to endear you to your company or it will take a little bit of the shine off of it.
Absolutely. It's
so I think there's so much that's can happen, especially in spaces and places where people were hired in tight markets. So employment right now from 2020 to 2030 is a tight job market. We just don't have enough Americans.
Right.
We don't have enough global population, but when you add on skills and experience, one of the reasons unemployment is so low is because we don't have the people.
Right.
Even with the layoffs that are going on right now, we still don't have the people. And so those people will quickly get absorbed. We're up against the fact that 10,000 baby boomers hit retirement eligibility every day. Right. And we're coming down off that peak and we have about 7 more years and not enough of Gen Z has entered the workforce to replace them. Right. Generation X was not that big. The baby boomers before us, we were a much smaller population. Millennials helped out quite a bit. but still not enough to match the size of what baby boomers were in the workforce.
Right.
We saw that accelerated a little bit during COVID, which we had the rapid decline because if people were eligible, they're like, well, I'm not going back to work to get COVID.
Mm-hmm.
I can stay home because I'm fully eligible for my pension, my 401k. I might as well take it. And then you're also seeing that the right skill set is not always in place of what people need for the roles that they currently have. And so I think that will exacerbate this pay transparency that's coming into place. And so those are my thoughts. I think
I love this.
corporations aren't ready.
Mm-hmm.
In general, they have a tough time having difficult conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And things that I've noticed when I'm teaching leadership is that people don't know how to listen. My partner and I, on one of my projects, we just did a whole theater style project on teaching people the art of listening. As a coach, it's the first thing they drill into us when I'm teaching and training other coaches and leaders who are using coaching skills to further their team's progress. Knowing that there's like 7 different ways to listen, people just don't realize that.
Mm-hmm.
And there's nuances in there, like how do you signal receptiveness when you actually don't agree with the person, but you want them to feel heard so that you can come to the same side of the table and co-create a solution, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the person on the other side is always going to feel like you're adversarial until you signal receptiveness, until you show that you're listening. And then they'll go into that co-creation mode, which you know, because you co-create with clients all the time.
Yeah.
And so how do you shift the conversation? I don't think that most leaders have the skills that they need in order to begin even that part of the discussion. Let alone talk about something as personal as remuneration for the work that I give you.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and this is what I tell my clients. How are they paying you to get close to your genius every day?
Right. Oof. How they pay you to get close to your genius every day. I love, Ebony, you've dropped so many golden nuggets in this just little segment. And I want to almost recap a couple of them for the audience members that are here at the table and watching this now live or even watching later on in another time. So a couple of things that I've heard you say is, so number one, it's a matter of there is an opportunity to have a conversation with your colleagues about being transparent about your own pay, even if maybe there is not pay transparency, and ensuring that you can elevate your own status in order to elevate their status. You're almost like really just rise together in order to do that. So that's number one that you mentioned. You also mentioned in the way that you're asking for a raise, and I know that in our ways, and we've worked together on really on the negotiation front and being brought into organizations to talk a little bit about negotiation, whether it's with women or others, and how do we refine those skills. But you said, you keep your receipts, meaning you keep your accomplishments of what you've done, how you've added value. And when you are ready to have these conversations on additional compensation, you're bringing those up and you are making sure that you are making the case for how do you ensure that they know, like, how much is it going to cost them to replace that position. So that was the second one. And the third one, I mean, you've dropped so many pieces, but the third one that I wanted to make sure is, the generational disparities, right? There's so many different generations that are in the workforce right now. And this pay transparency is going to impact people on a different level. It doesn't mean that everybody's going to be rushing in as a manager. Everybody's going to be rushing into your office to talk to you about that. Generationally, it's going to be impacted differently. I will share a quick example on my end. I remember, so having a lot of my career working in higher ed and higher education, if you work for a public institution in some states, the state's mandate and pay transparency is there. So you can see your colleagues' salaries, and it's been around for many, many years. And I feel like a lot of times what people do is that when they are upset with someone and a colleague, they're like, how much does she make? How much do they make? Right? In the sense of, and that point, to just fuel your energy and fire. And you walk in, you're able to walk in. And I think, knowledge is power in the way that you're using it, right? But it's a matter of how you also are coming in from that space. And so a question that I have for you is, do you feel, I think I'm under the recommendation of, can managers get ahead of this and have an open conversation about, hey, this is coming down the pipeline and I want to have an open door for any of our team members to be open to having this conversation? Like, how, should managers get ahead of this before, and how do they get ahead of this? I'm under the impression that it would be best for managers to get ahead of what this looks like, to have these conversations with a team before waiting for a team member to have the conversation with them. But love to hear your thoughts on that, and what's the best course of action to do that?
I think the company needs to get ahead of it.
Ooh, okay.
Right? The company needs to see, do your leaders have the toolkit to facilitate these conversations and still retain your talent? And if not, what development could you do in the interim so that they're not caught flat-footed when it's brought up in an annual review? Because what first of the year typically means for a lot of organizations is you're going to do a performance review, and then you'll have a review with your manager on how you contribute back to the team submissions and goals. Going into those discussions this year in a lot of states, it's going to look a little bit different. And so before those conversations happen, the organization needs to figure out, what's your policy? How will you address it? Is there an ongoing review project? And quite frankly, depending on where you are, the review project should have happened this year. But we know that people are reactive. As our friend Angelique always says, people only spend money on their super problems. So if it's not specific, urgent, persistent, pervasive, expensive, and recognizable, they're not thinking about it.
Right.
As we go into this year, it could become their super problem. It could become the urgent thing that you need skills development on to have these difficult conversations, teaching people how to listen, asking people what they want. Sometimes the biggest hindrance to growth in culture building is there's not financial literacy for the team members that you employ. If you ask most employees, how much money does it take for you to run your household? People think it's their salary, and it's not.
It's not.
Right? And so it's in that financial literacy that companies could begin to help people address and understand what compensation really is. One of the things when I worked for a large multinational is they sent us a compensation booklet every year. Not only did it have the amount of money that got wired, but it talked about our pension, our 401k matching, the additional benefits. Like, we had a concierge back in the early aughts that the company paid for 40 hours. And let's be honest, it's because they didn't want us to take time off. So you could hire the concierge to meet the dishwasher repair person at your house, and they would sit there and wait. And then you could be in the office, right? They would wrap our Christmas present. You could give them your Christmas list, and they would go to the mall for you. You give them the money to pay for the gifts, but they would go to the mall, do the shopping, get everything you wanted, wrap it for you, and deliver it to us at the office. This is before apps like Instacart and things like that. So, thinking about total comp and what that really means is where companies will have to do a better job of telling their story. Because just because somebody's getting this in salary, you don't know if another person is getting help. Their salary may be lower, but they have perquisites. And so that was an interesting thing that I learned early on in my career, talking to a senior executive. She goes, "Do you ask for perquisites?" I'm like, "No, like what?" And moving beyond stock options. I have clients that we've negotiated things like school tuition. Right? So yeah, my salary is lower, but the private school tuition for my 4 kids are paid for. And it's not an after-tax dollar expense. And so it's in those things inside compensation, as companies are looking, that you'll have to look at what's the total comp package, and that conversations that need to be had. And if you work at large organizations that have a lot of perquisites to retain people, all of those things become important.
Absolutely.
So I think that's the conversation that people need to get in front of. Like, corporations, one, need to equip their teams and their leaders. And two, what's your total comp story that you're telling? to your employee so they understand what their real remuneration is. If you're, there's companies here that I know in our local city, their retirement contribution is 187% of every dollar the employee contributes. 187% is what they give towards retirement. And I'm like, wow. And they're like, got a tough time recruiting. So we try to hook people in with the pension. We hook people in with our 401k. We hook them in with stock matching. And like, stay here 5 years, we go from matching 7% to matching 12%. That's how we get longevity. You stay another to 10-year mark, we'll match another 14%. And like, really, they're like, that's why people are here 25 years. You can't beat what we offer for retirement. And they're like, our company is built on legacy knowledge. And so as we're going in, people will really have to look at the storytelling. I know I gave you a long answer. Feel free to
This is
jump.
great. No, this is fantastic. I think that, and just going back to kind of recapping a little bit of the things that you've just shared. So, one of the things that I want to make sure that you've highlighted that is so, I feel a lot of times people leave things on the table, and I think this is coming back on the negotiation front. And when we work with organizations to elevate, and having conversations with employees within organizations, how do they elevate, how do they speak up for themselves, but more importantly, how do you demystify a little bit about the negotiation process? And one of the things that you brought up so clearly was the fact that don't just, we're talking about financial literacy here for especially in the employee side, but more importantly, what you're asking for is not off limits, right? You're talking about, when you're negotiating your school tuition, right? Or school tuition for, or relocation expenses. There's a number of things, a myriad of things that you can negotiate here. And to think that it's only about salary or it's just about the compensation, you're just leaving so much on the table of what it looks like. I mean, I remember having worked for a Fortune 500 company, and I remember speaking to a colleague who had just relocated, and another one that was in a very similar situation. And when they found out that they were still paying a compensation, like a living expense, it was just like, oh, I didn't even know that I could ask for that. And it's like, it's how are you mapping out the things that are a priority for you? And salary is just one facet of it, but it's not the whole facet of what you do. And I think a lot of times right now, it's still very much an employees market where people can have a little bit, you have leverage, so much more leverage to ask for things above just compensation, above the work flexibility and environment and so on. And so I think that was a huge piece of what you shared in the way that you're thinking creatively outside. I love the way that you also shared that corporation, it's a matter of right now getting ahead of what you don't want is the surgence of individuals in January when this comes into effect to a line out the door, right? You can just imagine what this can look like in, having conversations, booked meetings, and managers not having the talking points, not having the tools they need to be able to manage this piece, right? And so this is where you have to think through how much what's going to happen, right, in January, in the next, and we should be monitoring this trend, but what's going to happen in the first quarter of the year with these new pay transparency laws coming in place, and people having these conversations, I anticipate, and I'm going to tell you right now, I feel like people are sleeping on this. The holidays are upon us right now, and everyone's just coming back, from Thanksgiving holiday. And now we have basically a few weeks left in the year. People are not even thinking about this. And by the time they come back from vacation in January, frankly, it's going to be like a cold bucket of water falling on them when people look through how they find, the pay transparency, and it's going to happen. So what you do is hire. I mean, this is where you're talking about now bringing in outside experts like yourself, Ebony, like what you do at M&M Equation, in bringing in outside experts to help you craft these messaging to the way you're disseminating a leadership roadmap, frankly, and how corporations can disseminate and be prepared for this, because if they don't, it's going to cost them more in the long run. And so that's what I'm gathering, in the sense of like, I just feel like this is like the sleeping, like everybody's very sleepy right now with the holidays, and they're not really anticipating what's coming up. So I wanted to ask if you had something that has come up. It seems like you have something that you're thinking through as well from that.
Well, if they're international, EU passed a law, right?
Right.
If the gender pay gap is 2.5% or more and you have 50 or more employees, you have to come up with an action plan. How's that for CSR? Right?
Yeah.
An action plan on creating gender pay equity. And so I think as we move in and we see these trends, it will be prudent for organizations to really think about what their strategy is going to be. So we'll get the transparency, and New York State has, if you post a job, you got to put the pay range.
Right.
A lot of people don't know what the pay ranges are currently for jobs that maybe they've been in for 5 to 7, 10 years. Know that somebody's coming in making a lot more money than what they're currently making, right? They've been existing on a 2 or 3% raise for the past 7 years, and this new person coming in a tight job market all of a sudden makes $15,000 more than them.
Absolutely.
And what does that look like? So I think corporations will have a lot of things that they'll need to work on. One, building out the skills and the tools for their leaders to have the conversation. Two, what is your policy and what's your action plan for when this comes into fruition? And three, as more changes are legislated in, do you have a tiger team that's going to work on this on the development side to help you retain your talent? It is not going to get easier to recruit people. Even as we go into a softening of the economic market, quite frankly, people who want jobs, a lot of them have jobs. I remember when I switched companies, like significantly, it was probably the second time in my career, when I resigned to my boss, I said, oh, we had this habit of doing walk and talks, and we would go get ice cream, and we were in an urban area. And I said to him, hey, hate to tell you this, but I'll be leaving. I'm resigning. And we're both eating scoops of ice cream. And he goes, what? I said, and I didn't leave for money. I left because of culture. I had a negative experience with someone who he reported into. And it's in that negative experience, because the universe always works out. I then was at a conference for my industry and got offered a job 2 weeks later. I negotiated hard for them, harder than I negotiated with them previously when I was onboarded. And I remember I said to him, I said, look, he goes, was it because of that conversation? I said, it was. And you should know that unemployment is at 3.9%. Everybody who has a job, who wants a job, has a job. And I was one of those people until I had a bad experience with a leader here. And I thought to myself, I don't have to be treated like this. I am empowered and I can leave. And so he goes, oh. He goes, did you get a lot more money? I said, a lot. And the fact that you underpaid me for 2 years until I became eligible internally to rotate into a new job, all of a sudden I get a 27% raise. I didn't do that great of a job, but you knew you were paying me under market. Even internally in our own company. And so when I became eligible to move jobs, I got this huge raise. And now I find out 9 months later, I'm getting a 70% pay increase to do less work. That's the power of numbers and the power of knowing your worth. And I think these conversations, which he completely understood and got, and we had a great transition period, but I think these conversations will happen more and more. And so this is where companies will need to be prepared, and also their leaders.
Absolutely. And I want to almost even share, and what an amazing piece. I know that we talk about it all the time offline, that we're not employable right now in the sense of we just, when you get the touch of what it looks like to actually run your own business, but also scale it. It's it's hard to go back to the biweekly paycheck. But I will say, one of the things I want to touch on with that is that small businesses and nonprofits and everything else are not absolved of this pay transparency. And I want to be very, very clear with that, because one of the things that we're seeing a lot, and I want to speak to this, is in 2023 and more, because the EU has really led the way in some of these, especially with corporate social responsibility, with ESG practices and reporting out, has led the way in really mandating what and tracking of how all organizations that have employees, small business, corporations, what have you, are reporting out transparency as it relates to their social impact processes. And if small businesses are like, oh no, this is just pay equity, and the pay transparency is something that just affects large corporations, and nonprofits are like, oh, we won't see this, you're wrong. I mean, this is going to impact you, and it's a matter of how are you thinking through. And this is where, a lot of times people don't really correlate where CSR, corporate social responsibility, and ESG, environmental, societal, and governance, how this, what pay transparency is going to fall under and really impact your internal team members and the social impact that you're having, not only externally, but how are you, it doesn't matter just to like philanthropically give all these great things, but how's the treatment of your internal employees looking like? What's the turnover rate looking like in the way that you are, whether you're a publicly traded company and shareholders are looking into these transitions and these rotations, or if you're not, how are you actually keeping track of the satisfaction rates of your own employees and building that culture, right? You mentioned very clearly, Ebony, that this is going to be, in a sense, that this is not going away in the way that how hard the job market is. But what is going to be very, very clear is that pay transparency is not just a trend that's happening. It's coming, it's growing, and you need to make sure that you are equipped and prepared for it. I'd love to also just make sure that small businesses and even nonprofit organizations are also thinking through what is your social impact plan, in the way that you are, whether it's your policies with governance that you are setting in place for these pay transparency laws. How are you equipped to disseminate that information? We talked a little bit about process today, but also how are you, these are practices, frankly, and we can get into this conversation maybe in the next segment, but these are processes that can prevent you, frankly, from scaling your organization, your business, and your practice. And so it's a matter of how you're thinking through. You have and hiring outside capacity building organizations that can help you see that through. So it's something that I was, just thinking through, where a lot of misconceptions like, oh, this doesn't apply to me as a corporation. I'm not a big corporation. This doesn't apply to me. Pay transparency is going to be applying to all organizations, corporations, nonprofits, and the like, where you're going to have to tackle this. So before we wrap up, because I know we've had such a great topic. Yeah, no, I'd love to share with you. I wanted to make sure that you're giving any closing remarks or thoughts on that, Ebony.
Well, I want to talk on what you just said.
Yeah.
We're a small business, and we're in the supply chain of large organizations.
Yeah.
They ask us for our ESG policies.
They sure do.
They ask us about what do our vendors look like, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because as part of ESG, they're doing total supply chain. So even if you may be a small company and pay transparency and pay equity, those plans don't apply to you. Your actual customer, because you're in their supply chain and it does apply to them, may then start the inquiry process about where are you with that. And so don't go by the numbers because, the law doesn't apply. I think your point's an excellent one. And I just want to bring on the fact that if you are selling into large corporations, they're asking. I had people ask, like, what's the diversity of your team look like? What are the gaps in the pay ranges? Recently, when I was getting vendorized, and they're like, this is a part of our ESG policy. And as we go towards compliance, what's your water usage, right? And so these are questions that are put in RFPs for small businesses that we also need to be aware of, because we are in the supply chain for companies that are in the compliance zone for these legislation that's out there and regulations that are coming into play. So wanted to just kind of pile on to what you were saying about that
Yeah.
as a small business, we're not absolved from this. We will need to move on. I think for final thoughts,
Mhm.
people need to be prepared to have the conversation.
Mm.
Your employees will have the conversation, whether you are prepared or not. And it would be better to have a consolidated message and understanding what total compensation looks like. And do your team members have the capability and the capacity to have these sensitive, difficult conversations that will leave you and your organization on the winning side, where people feel like they are respected, they're remunerated well, but they also can come and have these conversations and end with a good feeling. Because this is where culture comes in. Do they feel included? Can they learn from you? Are they being paid for their zone of genius
Mhm.
at a level that is in line with other people inside the company, if not inside the marketplace, right? And not just the people inside the company. So those are my final thoughts.
This is great, Ebony. Thank you for those final thoughts, and I will echo and thank you for sharing also on the small business side, because we see it. We see it all the pieces, right? So I will also just provide some of the final thoughts on this segment, and I think that this will probably not be the last time that we come on together in sharing a little bit about what can be accomplished in having more transparent conversations as it relates to pay equity and other things that we can explore together. What are my final thoughts? My final thoughts include the fact that, number one, if you're a manager or if you're a corporate leader, one of the things that you need to start thinking of, don't sleep till the new year to deal with this. Begin having some conversations. Even if you need help, reach out to capacity building organizations such as Ebony's organization in helping you think through what this can be and how do you provide your team with the tools to have these necessary conversations with with the employees that they are supervising. If from the employee perspective, one of the things that now that you have more knowledge to arm yourself with, how are you utilizing this to have conversations with your managers, with your executives in the way that can be productive for your progression? How are career performance plans being created for you in the way to elevate? And know that you have a choice. You want to make sure that you're negotiating with this new information. You're negotiating outside of just compensation. You're negotiating a full range of package. But I also encourage, and we've talked about this today, for you to have the conversation with your colleagues in the way that the more conversations are happening, whether or not these laws are going to in place within the state that you live in, how are you having these conversations with your colleagues? And then lastly, for my recap, is one of the things that we last touched on is small businesses, nonprofit organizations. This also applies to you in the way that you are looking to scale your organization. We've talked about the RFP process. So if you're a nonprofit organizations and you're getting looking into larger level government grants and your larger level even corporate philanthropy, they're going to ask about the social impact, the demographics. They're going to ask about what your organization looks like. If you're a small business, I know for a fact you will not be scaling your business B2G or B2B if you don't have, or scaling to the point of where you want to go. And if that's your intention, if you don't have an ESG or social impact plan for your business in place, and if you don't, we should have a conversation on how to get those things in place here at the Win Woman. So those are our recap, is how are we thinking through that for 2023. Ebony, thank you so much for joining us. I know we went a little over time, but this was such a delicious conversation in the way that we can dive in and leave some golden nuggets before the year end. I want to make sure that I ask you, where can people find you, Ebony? How can people get in touch with you? Because before we go, I'd love for people to know that.
So you can always reach out on LinkedIn. And so if you go type in Ebony Smith Coach, you'll get my short link. Feel free to follow or connect. And then you can also go to our website, which is ebonymequation.com. We would love to connect with you if you have questions. And also, if you're looking to develop a strategy around having the right conversations and helping your team members build capacity and capability, we would love to speak with you as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Ebony. Well, thank you for having us. Thank you, everyone who joined in, listened in, and is listening in later on. Here has been another segment of Winning Trends. This is I'm Yanyn San Luis, and I'm looking forward to our next conversation. So with that, I bid you all adieu and have a great afternoon. Thank you.